In this video, I'm going to be making some affordable housing. Tabletop terrain, Dungeons and Dragons style houses, using foam board and rolling pins mainly. This is going to be a rather extensively long video, just because I'm going through so many things and I didn't want to break it up in parts. But I mean, essentially, I'm going to start with how I built these houses, like the design, my thoughts on scale, what they were built out of and everything. And using rolling pins to get all the textures on here, I also tried using rolling pins on as many different type of materials as I could. It's clay, green stuff, different foams and all of that. So it's also kind of a video about, the application of rolling pins, not necessarily just on houses. And then I'm painting them all at the end, using sort of glazing, I guess you could call it, a zenithal priming and a glazing to get these lovely buildings done sort of rather efficiently. For me personally, I built these houses to use for tabletop terrain, Age of Sigmar specifically, because that's what I play. And that obviously doesn't mean anything. You could use them pretty much, in whatever way you like. And basically, I just want to show you the technique of how I built these, and you can apply in any manner. You don't need to be using like my specific measurements or colors or type of textures, anything like that. I just wanted to get some buildings on the tabletop that weren't sort of, not sort of several months long a project to build the one house. I did 4 of them, and for sort of something that in the end looks like this, I would say it was a pretty efficient process. But I had some requirements. My first thing was storage. I can't really have this stuff lying around. I'm going to have it in the basement. And I've got these boxes in the basement. It's basically the kind of boxes that you get when you move house and you pack all your stuff in it and it breaks, and then you move and then you unpack broken stuff. I used one of these boxes as sort of my starting point. I wanted to fit 4 of these houses in sort of half a box, leaving half a box for maybe a larger building or some other buildings. Well, let's start from the beginning. I just recently started working on an army, a Stormcast army for Age of Sigmar, and it was the first time I tried rolling pins. I think there's pretty much just one company that makes them. You can please say that I'm wrong, but it's Green Stuff World, and they've got tons and tons of different type of rolling pins. Now, a rolling pin basically is you have whatever clay or green stuff type of material sort of laid out in front of you, flat, and you roll a rolling pin on top of that, and it leaves an indentation that can represent different things. This is flagstones. Here's one called wood, and here's another one called cobblestones. And it's a pretty fast and efficient way, I guess, of mainly making some nice bases. And I did that for my entire army, using green stuff and then some other fluff, just to get sort of some kind of cobblestone thing going for my new army. And when I was sitting there doing that, I thought, it'd be a shame just to have rolling pins and only be able to use them for the one purpose, i.e. bases. And I thought I should be able to use this for like walls and terrain and stuff like that. Hence the idea of building houses. I've actually got a build here which is made from XPS foam. This isn't finished, and I promise there will be a video about it once I'm done. It was the first time I tried sort of building something out of XPS foam. And I mean, there's different ways of doing it. Either you can do what I've done here, which is basically cutting out every single stone and building a building, or you can sort of use a pencil or pen or something like that and draw sort of, say, cobblestones or, walls, stuff like that on top of it, and then paint it. But it's still sort of a process that's, if you're not used to it, it does take a bit of time. And I just thought, rolling pins, I should try it. And I did an initial test. I cut out, this is what I got left from the one sheet of foamboard. Foamboard is basically paper on two sides and some kind of foam in the middle. That's what foamboard is. And so I did a test. I took some dad's clay. I mixed it with white glue a little bit just to make it sort of a bit more resistant to attacks on the tabletop, but also giving it sort of a little bit of a different texture to work with. And rolled out the pin of the this is the flagstones, just to see how things worked out. And that's how it started. That's when I did this, I thought, yeah, I can do houses from this. No worries. The thing with foamboard, is that it's really easy to work with. It's really easy to cut, and it's like building a card house. You just cut out the cards in the shape you want them and glue them together. So all I had to do was cut out the different shapes I wanted, cover them with some clay and rolling pins, and hey presto, houses. Only building houses is, I'm not going to say more difficult than that. There's just a few things to think of. The biggest thing is, I guess, the design, the shape, also scale. And scale is really difficult, I think, because it's such a difference in like what type of game you play. I mean, I know Warhammer or Age of Sigmar is supposed to be a certain scale, but it's sort of like the miniatures are getting like larger and larger and larger. And I play Stormcast, and they're pretty large. I used my Stormcast minis sort of as a reference for the scale of these things. But if you would say place an old hammer dwarf in front of one of these houses, it'd be about yay high. So you just have to go for feel, I guess. Best option, I think, is to like have some minis around that you usually play with, place them in front of your sketch if you're sketching up a house, and just see what things feel like. I actually started doing it on just regular paper, cutting out sort of, this is maybe how long the wall should be, putting a mini in front of it, realizing now it's a little bit too big, and so on and so forth, until I was sort of still within the limits of my basement box, but things were looking pretty sort of in scale. The next thing is design, because I kind of made things a little bit complicated for myself. I wanted sort of like a farmhouse style look. And I've got to be honest with you that I'm not really, there's sort of a type of fantasy look for houses, sort of Tudor style buildings where you got sort of, do you call it stucco, I think? And like beams of wood and all of this, and maybe a little bit of a round tower and wooden shingles on the roof and stuff like that. And it's not really my bag. I don't mind them, and people make beautiful stuff. I just think to me it's a bit of a worn out kind of a thing, and personally I don't really like it. So I didn't want to do that, but I wanted sort of some kind of difference, not just straight walls. So I opted for a design that was, as you can see it, like the upper story is a little bit larger than the bottom story. And then I started thinking about textures. I knew I wanted like stone on the bottom, which was, where the flagstones, that's why I got the flagstones, that'd be great. And then I thought, what should it be up top? Well, wood would be nice. So I got a wood rolling pin. And then I had the cobblestones from before, which is like what I used on the chimneys. If you're going to try this later on, you think, wow, that's a really good idea. I want to do this myself. One thing that you can have in mind is when you design your house is to make individual pieces make them the size of like a roller or smaller. Because I noticed, say, with these flagstones, is I couldn't roll it this way because then the flagstones were sort of the wrong way around. So I had to roll it like this. And because this edge here, or this side of the building, is just exactly the size as a roller, surprise, coincidence, that was a lot easier than on the sides here, where I sort of had to, just roll half at a time and getting sort of a bit of a crack going, which is fine. But, you can make things easy by sort of adjusting sizes to the size of the roller. So eventually, basically, what I had was a house that was made out of paper, with all the measurements that, everything looked great. And the good thing of doing this is that I could then put that piece of paper on top of the foam board and just sort of check that, where I could fit all the pieces in efficiently, and sort of just use it as, a master, if you see what I mean. And I just drew everything out. And like throughout these 4 buildings, plus this little sort of test piece, this is what is left from the one sheet of foam board. Once I had all my housing plans drawn out on the foam board, it's time to cut it out. Using one of these knives, it's a blade and you can, These kind of blades, they're very cheap, and you'll be grateful to yourself if you actually sort of keep having a fresh blade, like you snap it off and you get a fresh new cut. It just makes your life so much easier. Now, once I had all my bits and pieces, I did 4 houses at a go, which is not something you need to do. I just thought, I might as well make 4 of them. It's time to get clay on there. Now, I've used something which is called air drying clay. There's the most typical kind is called DAS, which is not what I use. I used it for the test, but I knew I didn't really have enough, so I went to buy some new stuff. They were out of DAS clay and they only had their own, which is called hobby clay, classic. It's the same thing. It's air drying clay. The thing with air drying clay, and I'm going to mention this now, is that when this clay dries, it contracts, which means that it'll bend your foam board. Pretty much anything you put it on, even if you put it on like a plastic, like large enough gaming base, it will sort of bend the base because the force of the clay is so strong. And I'm fine with that because it actually gives these houses some character. It's not like fully straight walls. They're a little bit crooked. There are ways of helping it along so that it doesn't bend as much, which I'll show you in a while. I mixed in PVA glue. Now this is into the clay. This is because I want to change, basically because I've seen other people do it. For one thing is you get a bit of a harder surface, but mainly it's about the texture of the clay. Like I've tried both and I really liked the version of having PVA glue in it. And it's not just a little bit of PVA glue, it's quite a lot of PVA glue. But it changes the consistency of the clay, which makes it a little bit easier. You want something that's sort of like kind of a sticky dough. I don't know if you do any cooking or baking, but a little bit kind of sticky. And talking about sticky, what I've been doing is I've been putting all of this in a plastic bag, and then to mix it all together, I do it inside of the plastic bag, which thus means I don't have to put my hands in there, which means I don't get clay and PVA glue all over my hands. It's a pretty nifty way of just mixing these things up. But I just, after testing both, it was just sort of a little bit easier to get to roll it out, to get it flat, and to get a pretty hard surface with all this PVA glue in. Just as a side note, people sometimes complain of of the fact that there's clay and stuff like that cracks. And that's not the reason why I put the PVA glue in there. If you want your dad's clay not to crack, it's mainly about it cracks because it dries too fast. So if you're in a very hot and dry country, probably the clay dries too fast, and that's why it cracks. A way of remedying this is to like put it in something and like put a wet cloth underneath, on top, like put it in a bucket and put a wet cloth on top, and that'll slow down drying times quite a lot, but it will also stop the clay from cracking. It'll dry, it'll just not crack. Now, once I had my mixture going with clay and PVA glue, I pretty much just smudged it out on to the foam board, but then I put a little bit of water on top and a sheet of baking tray paper, because baking tray paper has silicone in it, so it sort of doesn't really stick all that well to the clay. And then you use one of these things to like try and roll out the clay as evenly as possible. Now here's the thing, with these, like if you manage to get an even surface, then when you roll the rolling pin, you will get like a very even and nice roll going, and all the texture will work out great. If you don't sort of roll it out exactly sort of level and perfect, then like the rolling pin, it'll just not, make any indentations in some places and all this kind of stuff. And I was kind of working kind of fast, and I wasn't really, at first, and got sort of a bit of a mixed result, i.e. it wasn't all that even, but I really liked how that turned out. Like if we have a look at this one, if you can see it from over there, there's like different spots here and there where the rolling pin just hasn't, left any indentations. And it just sort of looks like there's some other type of dirt or plaster, or like some stones have fallen out or whatever. It just adds character. So I love the fact that I did a half undecent job at evening the clay out, because it just left me with such much more personality in the surface of the brickwork. And these bricks were really easy to roll out. Now, then I went on to the wood, and that was actually a lot more difficult. Like this roller with wood texture, it's just got so much more details. There's even like small holes for like nails and things like that. And like it feels like the more precise and fine the texture, the more places where the clay can stick to the roller instead of like making a nice indentation. So as you can see here, this is not like an even wooden surface. And I was a little bit put down at that by first, but now that I'm done, I'm really glad that this is the way it turned out, because it just looks like there's plaster underneath, the wood has fallen off, or they've put plaster on top of the wood, I don't know. But it's just giving them a bit more character, which is kind of needed because it's just such flat surfaces. Now, all this clay work does get messy. I can't say anything than that. There's water involved. I always had like my rolling pin in water, so that the clay doesn't dry in your roller, because, you want to try and keep your rollers clean. But, the clay kind of gets a little bit everywhere. And the fact that I was doing 4 houses, like there was a lot of clay going. So if you can, stick outdoors. If not, if you're indoors, make sure you have like newspapers or whatever laying out, because it does get a little bit messy. Now, once I'd rolled these, done a roll, I cleaned off the edges with a knife, because I'll be gluing this all together, and I don't want the edges to be sort of out of control, because then the entire building will be a bit maybe too crooked. But I got more and more courageous, and the process was more and more rapid. I could like roll more things at the same time and stuff like that. So from starting out, it took a bit of time, but when I was sort of halfway, I was definitely, getting a lot of houses built. Now, once this is all dry, and it, you should leave this out to dry for quite some time, like at least overnight, or if not, maybe even longer. Sometimes you can be surprised over how long clay like this takes to dry. But I used sandpaper. This is a great thing to do outdoors as well. Just making sure that the edges were sanded down, which is fast. Also, like any sort of indentations, like I have the doorways, I have the sort of windows and stuff like that. And I even gave the entire surface like a quick stroke with the sandpaper, because there's always like small sort of things that stick out that will probably come loose pretty easily. And if you don't sort of sand it off, once you've painted and they then come off, then you'll just see so much sort of small clay marks or whatever, like from... Yeah, you get it. Now, sort of back to the design, because I mentioned doors and windows. Like, I want to make these kind of simple. This is the simple tabletop building. I have a vision of an advanced tabletop building where maybe I'll attempt doing actual windows with glass or whatever, or different size of doors and doorways and stuff like that. But I opted for like small slits for windows, and I did bigger holes for windows that I thought maybe I can put some kind of window in, but I'm not going to do that for this build, so I then put sort of shutters on top of that. And the slits are like, it's a nice sort of kind of if you live in a place where there's like orcs and stormcast loonies running around, you maybe don't want to have like grand glass windows going. Sort of slits where you can shoot your arrows out of is probably more intelligent. But I'm just going to jump in here and talk about something completely different to make this video even longer, which is back to the design once more. I recently saw a video, I think it was Adam from Tabletop Minions. And he was talking about like if you buy terrain, you can make sure you buy terrain that would work for several different scenarios. Like if you buy trees, you can always use them for different games and blah, blah, blah. The same kind of, and I thought, he's got a really good point. And I sort of had that idea while I was building these houses, and that was before I saw the video. But if you make a really sort of medieval Tudor type building, you're sort of really stuck with it in just sort of a medieval Tudor type game. And I'm not saying that these look futuristic, but I could easily sort of, if I wanted to, put them on sort of a post-apocalyptic type game where there's like a barn house going, or, some other kind of distant future where there's still some kind of houses about that are sort of non-specific. It could sort of work. If I would have done the sort of Tudor style thing, maybe done little bit more shingles and I don't know what, then it would be more stuck to sort of fantasy / medieval times. So it's kind of thing you can think about if you're getting into maybe building some houses. If you play different style of games, you can try and sort of adapt the building so that it could work in other situations as well. Like you could skip the chimney, perhaps, or I don't really know what. Like these two stories makes it look a little bit more medieval. Maybe if you skip that, it could just be like an old stone barn. I mean, they're still around today, and probably some of them will be around in 100 years as well. So, Now, I was mentioning the sort of crookedness, and at least one way of trying to prevent that. I mean, the biggest way of preventing it has to do with physics. Like if you have a really thin strip that is long, if you have a really long thin strip and you put clay on it, it's going to curve a lot. If you have something that sort of looks a bit more like this, it's not going to curve that much because of physics. I'm not a physicist, so I don't know really any more than that. But one way of preventing it is to use PVA glue on the other side. If you put PVA glue on the other side that the clay isn't on quite a lot and smudge it on there, that PVA glue will also sort of subtract, and it'll sort of fight its way back and straighten the entire piece out. But I left it. Like in retrospect, I even would have wanted my houses to be even a bit more crooked. And then it was time to glue everything together, like building up the card house. And for this specific project, I actually bought a hot glue gun. I haven't before because I've been thinking, you know, I buy so much stuff. Is it another thing I need to like spend my money on? And I went into one of these really cheap hardware stores and they had a really cheap one. This was like $8, something like that. You could obviously glue these buildings together with white glue. Only you'd have to do sort of like one joint at a time. And so, you know, if you're not in a hurry, you could definitely do that. But I strongly recommend using a hot glue gun because it's just very efficient. If you're sketching out a house of your own, like when you glue it together, make sure you have a thought about if like, does it go on like this or does it go on like this? Because I mean, it'll drastically, not drastically, but it will change your sort of layout by about 1 centimeter. So if you do it this way, then make sure you do it the same way on the next story if you've done what I did. If you haven't, it doesn't really matter. But, you know, depending on how big you want the roof, if you've already... Yeah. The reason why I did it the way I did it is because, like the ends of the foam board, I didn't want them to be visible from the front of the building. Once I had my sort of bottom story glued together, I made some just sort of supports to put in the corners to make it a bit more sturdy. And then I glued together the top story. Now the top story I didn't do any supports for because I was going to do a floor just for practical purposes of how to build the building together. And these I hadn't, I hadn't drawn these up beforehand because I knew that the sides, they were going to flex and they were going to do strange things. So I wouldn't know how they were going to turn out. So I glued together the top story, put it down on a piece of foam board and just drew out the size of it and cut it out sort of freehand. And then I wanted a little overhang, mainly because if you wouldn't have that sort of little overhang that's here, then you'd sort of see the foam board. And, you know, aesthetically, it's just a little bit nicer. And I actually tested and realized that like the depth of the foam board was the perfect depth. So I could put some scrap pieces of foam board down, put the top story walls and then the top story floor on top of that. And that was the perfect height. And I could just glue it on and it was really nice and even. Talking a lot this video, aren't I? And then it was just a simple matter of gluing the top story on top of the bottom story. And then I wanted to get into like finishing the bottom story off, which meant making doors to start with. And I was going to I realized with the sort of, I was going to use the wood rolling pin again. That had these sort of a bit tricky texture. And I realized that, you know, I could use clay, but I actually wanted this to be even all the way. And so I opted for green stuff. Now green stuff, if you haven't used green stuff, it's usually comes like this, or sometimes where, you know, you get a blue and a light green anyway, and lots of different brands make them. This is from Green Stuff World, but you know, Games Workshop, Citadel makes them. Sorry about the noise. Galefoss 9, I had some, you know, lots of, everyone makes sort of green stuff. Basically, it's sort of an epoxy putty, and you take equal amounts of either color and mix them together, and when they sort of mix together, they harden. The easiest way I find to sort of measure out that you get even parts is like when you cut it off, you can roll sort of small balls and see that they're the same size. This is actually pretty nifty because if you do a straight line, you sort of automatically kind of get even amounts of the putty. If you don't get even amounts and if you don't mix it well, it won't harden. So be careful with that. And using rolling pins on green stuff is super simple and usually turns out great. I just use water for sort of as a lubricant. So once more is with the clay. When I mix the green stuff, I smudge that out, and then I put baking tray paper and use the this thingy to make it really flat. Then I just put a little bit of water on that. I've got my rolling pin in water the whole time, just dry a little bit off, and then just roll, and you're fine. As I said before, like I always keep these in water while I'm working, because that way nothing will sort of ever harden on it. And I mean, both clay and green stuff is really easy to sort of clean up as long as everything's wet and you haven't let it dry on there. So just keep them wet the whole time you're working is my recommendation. Now, if you're going for what I did, which is doors, you don't have to have doors. It could be open, because then you could actually put sort of like your minis in there, and they could shoot out of windows or whatever. But if you're going for doors, like what I did, I just took the foam board, the piece that I cut out, and I put the green stuff on top of that, which sometimes it was a bit of a close call. And I would have been better off making like just a larger square that I put on the inside and put the green stuff on that. But it would have cost me sort of a bit more of the foam board, and it would have cost me a bit more of the green stuff. So I was just trying to use as little a resource as I could. And then next up, I needed something to like cover up the seams, if you want to call it. And so I opted for XPS foam. I just wanted to test it to see how it would be to like use rolling pins on XPS foam. Now I had these pieces, these were left over from when I did this build. And this build I did, out in the country house where there is an old, pretty undecent hot wire cutter. Now a hot wire cutter is something, it's basically a flat surface and there's a machine inside that warms a wire that's sort of suspended, and when the wire is hot you can cut your foam with it because the heat will melt the foam, and you can like cut really, really thin strips and whatever. I didn't have access to that, so I just used a knife to make as thinner pieces of XPS foam as I could, and then tried to use a lot of force again with the wooden roller to get sort of planks, I guess you could call it, that I then glued on top of the edges of the building where the foam board was showing. And like you get a really decent, actually, indentation in XPS foam when using a roller, especially if you use a lot of force. Now these strips of blue XPS foam, I glued them into place with white glue, just to make sure that, because you can use hot glue, but hot glue also sort of melts the foam. So I used white glue, and then once they were sort of glued in place, I used just the edge of a roller and just a knife and stuff like that, just to sort of rug the edges up a bit, make it look a bit more sort of torn. So I just a bit more character going there. And then just mainly for display purposes, like to show you and to try myself, like when you have foam board like this, you can actually peel the board off and then you're just left with foam. And so I did exactly the same thing there for the shutters. So I peeled away the board and did an indentation with the wooden rolling pin in the foam, and that worked out fine as well. The only, I guess, issue here is they were a bit thick, and like so the process and the technique worked out fine. It's just like, as for shutters, they're a bit kind of rudimentary. They're very thick, like there's some real sturdy planks they've been using for shutters. So maybe I should have, I wanted to try it, but maybe I should have used something different. Maybe just gone for the XPS foam for shutters or something like that instead of the foam board foam. There's a lot of foam going. If I would have been smart, I would have thought about chimneys from the go. I forgot about chimneys, and I'd already done all the clay, and I didn't want to do the whole clay mess again. Like, I already spent 20 minutes scrubbing that table outdoors, and so I did chimneys. I just went for sort of what looked nice. The only thing I was trying to pay attention to was that the height in the end wouldn't, interfere with my fitting everything into a box in the basement. And I put some, just to make the roof a bit sturdier and to have something to glue the actual roof on later on, I just put some strips out to sort of get some support going up there. And when those were in place, I could put the chimney in, draw a line so I knew what was going to be sticking up. And that way I knew sort of where I needed to put the texture and where I wouldn't have had to put the texture. And I used green stuff, same as on the doors, for the chimneys. And I used the cobblestone rolling pin. Now, as I said, I would rather have used clay for the chimney because it would be nice if they were a bit crooked, like if the clay would have, messed things up a little bit. But I kind of forgot about chimneys. But now there's chimneys, and they've got green stuff on them. And it looks really nice with these sort of cobblestone chimneys. Now, once the chimneys were glued in place, and these supports were all in place, I was actually going to put some black paint on there. Because I'm going to be putting a roof on here, and it'll be tricky to sort of paint the inside once the roof is on. And I also wanted to make sure that there was black paint all the way down the chimney. If I would have done that later on, then it would probably be sort of flowing rattle can black primer all over the roof and stuff like that. So I took them outdoors and just sprayed sort of the edges and the inside of the roof a little bit, sort of where the windows are, and just made sure that the inside of the chimney was like completely black. And then it was time to work on a roof. Like, you've already seen these, so it's not as much of a spoiler, but obviously, like, you can make shingles, like you cut out pieces of cardboard or like whatever it is you're using, and like you put one little piece at a time, and in the end, it looks nice. But to do that on these 4 buildings was not something I was interested in. And I didn't have this planned from the start. I was walking around wondering, what should I be making the roof out of? Because this is the first time I'm building these houses. This is the first time I build houses. I haven't said that. I haven't built houses before. I'm not your crafting guru. And then we got a delivery of something. And like, I saw the edge of the cardboard, and I was like, that could be a roof. And so I went to sort of to the recycling, and I got, this is actually from someone else's diaper box, I think. But it was surprisingly easy to tear off the top layer of like paper or whatever you want to call it on the cardboard, and underneath is this lovely sort of, could be a tiled roof with really long tiles. It definitely could be like if you're building something for something futuristic and you want like a metal corrugated kind of a roof going. This is definitely a metal corrugated roof. But I figured this is going to be my roof. And so I stripped off the top sort of piece of paper or whatever you want to call it, and realized that there was quite a lot of sort of glue and fluff underneath. And I thought, this is going to be, take lots of time to clean off. But I just tried with a bit of sandpaper, and it was just really surprisingly easy to sandpaper off all that sort of excess fluff. And so all of a sudden I had a roof plan that was quite efficient. And I just, I actually put out once more, like just pieces of regular paper, just to see sort of how big the roof was going to be, but also to sort of make some marks on where the chimney was, because the chimney is glued in place. and then I just transferred that onto the cardboard and cut out the pieces. And you know, there's going to be a roof. I've been pretty prolific. I've just been trying to get some houses done, but I wanted to show you, like, I mean, obviously wherever along the way you could do detailed stuff. You could have more windows. You could make windows with some kind of glass in them. All this kind of stuff. Doors that open, no doors, square doors instead of like oval doors and stuff like that. So just to show you, I made a hole in one of the roofs, just as an example of like details you could do if you wanted to put more effort in, which is basically just cutting a hole in the cardboard. And then I used matches that I just scratched them a bit to get a bit more texture going, glued them to the back, and then I took some other cardboard, it was like from a packet of sardines or something, and glued underneath of that, and hey presto, there's like a hole with some wood, and it looks great. And I mean, you could be doing this kind of stuff everywhere, but I just did the one just for show. And now the roofs were pretty much done. All that was left is like where they join up the top. And I used toilet paper rolls, which is my new go-to shingle. You know, if you've been hoarding toilet paper during this ongoing pandemic, I'm looking at you, then, you know, this is what you can do with all the, you know, toilet paper roll thingies that you got left over, which is make shingles out of them, because they've got this really nice sort of edge. They're a bit sort of bent, and I exaggerated that a little bit by putting it sort of on a pencil and bending it down so they got even a bit more bent. And then I just cut out thin strips of toilet paper inside of toilet paper roll thingy and glued it up top, and the houses were done pretty much. Last surprise. So this is a bit of a disclaimer in the middle of things. I did a video recently about Green Stuff World's liquid pigments. And I did it because I got these pigments just because I saw them. I really liked them, and I still very much like them. They will feature later on in this video as well. And the company, Green Stuff World, really liked the video. And after that, they've been very nice to me, which is not so strange because I helped them show some of their stuff. But I'm, on the other hand, you know, I'm just using the stuff that I would normally use. But I contacted them and said that I was going to be using rolling pins. Like, I'd already bought this because I used it in the army. I got the idea for the houses, and I thought, you know, if they can send me some rolling stones, if they could send me rolling stones, then, you know, to play in my living room here, then I would be making some free videos for them. But no, I contacted them about the rolling pins and said, you know, do you want to send me some stuff, because I'm going to be doing something about rolling pins. And I was going to do it anyway, but, you know, if I get to save some money, you know, I would have mentioned the rolling pins anyway, and they're the only company I know that make the rolling pins. But I still want to sort of disclaim this. So they sent me, I think I made a list of like 5 or 6 rolling pins, and they sent me 2. But that doesn't matter. I'm still very grateful. It was the flagstones. And then I'd asked for this. There was something else that I'd asked for, which was like bricks or something like that. It wasn't the wooden one, because the wooden one I actually bought as well. But instead they sent me this Greek rolling pin. And I was like, Greek? Like, I'm not... It's like Age of Sigmar and stuff. I'm not building a Greek temple. But then I had to look at this Greek rolling pin. And it's like actually got some really nice details on it. Like, I wouldn't roll it out in the same way as I've been doing these, but some of the sort of ornamental stuff that's going on here is really, really nice. And I thought I could just do some details in some material as sort of decorative ornaments and put on the houses. And so I got some of this super sculpey, which was also sent to me together with the rolling pins. And I thought, well, okay, I'll try it. What's this? Got no idea. Basically, it's clay that you, instead of the fact that it air dries, you dry it in the oven for 15 minutes. The first thing I noticed with this super sculpey is that it's a lot more sticky than the other ones. And when it gets stuck in your rolling pin, it's a bit of a hassle to get it out. I just want to mention that. The easiest way I found to clean up your rolling pin after you've got super sculpey stuck in it is to have some super sculpey and like, you know, it's sort of, if you've got a bigger blob, sort of the smaller blobs stick to it, and you can sort of clean your rolling pin by just sort of dabbing super sculpey to it. Because I had really no luck cleaning it with water or anything like that. Maybe I did something wrong, but hey, that's how it worked out for me. The thing that sort of amazed me with it is that you get really, really, really fine detail. But anyway, I got some of this super sculpey out in between sort of baking tray paper. Used this thingy again. Roll this out, and like you get really fine details, and you can have it really thin if you're careful. But then I wanted to cut the details out, which I did, but I also realized that, you know, while doing that, everything got a little bit wobbly. But I was like, okay, fine, that's just the way it's going to be. And I put it in the oven, and, you know, after 15 minutes was gone, I took it out, and I realized that just when it comes out of the oven, it's still kind of soft, like I scraped the edges in a little bit. So I quickly made another one where I rolled these details out, and as soon as that one came out of the oven, I cut out the details. And so it was firm, but it was still just a little bit soft, so that things didn't get wobbly, but I could like cut out things a lot more precisely. Now, so the plus side of cutting things out before it goes into the oven is that you can sort of shape them a little bit. Like I made some different shapes, but it was a lot easier cutting it when it had dried just a little bit as soon as it get out of the oven. Just as a quick tip, like once this is dried, it's really easy to crack. And so if you have like a texture like this that is really sort of ornamental, it could be, you know, whatever, and you want something on your base that looks like it's a really nice marble floor that has all these beautiful things on it, but it's cracked, or, you know, whatever you got going, you get a really nice cracked effect. So yeah, probably great for bases or like small dioramas or whatever. If you want something broken that exists on a rolling pin, roll it out, super sculpey, put it in the oven, take it out, let it dry, and then just crack it. Now all these small sort of ornaments, you know, I thought maybe, I don't really know what these houses are they barracks, is it people living here, is it farmhouses or whatever, but I just, you know, it could be sort of symbols for the fact that it's a shop, or, you know, it's just small things. And I put them out, I glued them on with these are glued on with super glue, like really strong Gorilla super glue. And like, it's small details, but small details kind of go a long way. And then I was done. Then I had my houses. Now it was just time to paint. So first off, I zenithal primed these. I didn't film it because I'll just tell you about it. Zenithal priming is basically when you use either rattle can or airbrush. I used rattle can. Spray them all black, and then you use a white and you dust from sort of up top or from the sides. I did quite a creative kind of zenithal priming, i.e. It wasn't necessarily sort of evenly just sprayed from up top and from the sides. I sort of went into, you know, I knew if we have a look at this one, for example, this has been painted with more layers and more things are going on, but underneath this is a lighter spot of zenithal priming. And obviously all the details get a depth because of the fact that whatever's in the recesses is darker and whatever is sort of sticking out is a bit brighter. But also if you look at the roof, see if I can get some light on it. it's sort of lighter and darker in sort of patches. And that's just where I sprayed a bit more white on. It doesn't sort of necessarily mean that there's the imaginary sky shining on it, which is, you know, the effect of zenithal priming. It was also a bit sort of artsy. After the zenithal priming, I went in with a dry brush, and I used a makeup brush. This is like what you sort of put rouge and stuff like that on. And basically the theory is the bigger the brush, the more bristles and the finer they are, the finer you can do the dry brush. And the dry brush is basically you dip something in paint, you dip your brush in paint, you wipe most of it off so that it's almost completely dry, and then you brush on top of whatever it is you're painting. And the paint will only stick to whatever's sticking out. And so I dry brushed them first off with a little bit of white in the areas where I wanted to sort of enhance the zenithal priming, just make it pop a little bit more. Because then I was going to go in and only paint these using ink. And I got this set of inks, lots of different companies make up, you know, different sets of inks. I got these scale color inks. It's called Inktensity. So there's a black, a wood, a chestnut, a violet, a blue, a green, a red, and a yellow in this set. And basically, the theory behind this is that inks are transparent paints. They're not opaque paints. Like your regular paints that you paint with when you paint your mini is opaque. You can't see through it. Whereas inks are transparent. And so if you use an ink to paint on top of a zenithal priming, then you'll just sort of add a color, so to speak, to the zenithal priming. Which would mean, like, because if I would have to sort of paint these all in a sort of in a regular manner, like a base layer, and then do highlights and washes and all these things, I wanted to try this because it was potentially kind of efficient. I started with the wood. I used the one that was called Inktense Wood, and it was sort of a little bit yellow, which was fine, but I diluted it with water, and I also put contrast medium in it. It does, you know, you don't necessarily need to use contrast medium, but you probably want to use, for this purpose, some kind of flow improver that'll help the ink to sort of flow around a little bit and flow into the recesses, because otherwise you tend to end up with sort of small air bubbles and stuff like that on very sort of, when it's very textured surfaces, like on these houses and on the wood, you get small bubbles, and when that bubble cracks, it's just, there's no paint there. So you want something to sort of kill the surface tension, and I used contrast medium, just a few drops, and water, because the inks are they're pretty strong, so I diluted them pretty heavily. And then, yeah, I started with the wood. It was a bit yellow. Thought that was a bit boring. Added some purple, made things look cool. I then moved on to the roof, where I sort of mixed some brown and some red into sort of a brickish kind of a color. And also adding some black here and there to sort of, you know, enhance wherever the zenithal priming was a bit sort of darker. I could enhance that with a bit of the black ink. I made a video about zenithal priming, or the reasons why you should zenithal prime, which is mainly focused on miniatures. But I mean, that goes for houses as well. You can housing as well, terrain. You can check that out. I moved on to the stonework, where I used the Inktense black and also some of the blue. Like usually stones, I mean, for one thing, I can do whatever I want, but you know, usually stones have different colors going in them. They're usually not just gray. So I added some blue just to get a little bit more character going. Now, once everything had a layer of ink, like I did the doors green and all this kind of stuff, I just used what I thought looked nice. I wanted to sort of just add a little bit more. I'm not very good at just stopping at the, you know, I'm done. You could just do the ink and you could be done. I wanted to add a little bit more. And so I opted first for some more dry brushing. Now I invented a technique. I don't think I invented it. I just did it. Someone most probably has done it before me. But when you've got a big sort of dry brush like this, then you can dry brush with two colors at the same time. And I figured for the stonework, because stone, you know, it's usually got different characters going in it. So I dipped the one side of it in a light gray and the other side of it in a light brown. And then, you know, when you wipe it off, if I would do this, it wouldn't work because you would mix them. But if you make sure to do it in a line like this on a piece of paper, and then when you brush it out, you also do it in lines like this, then you get a mixture of like some browns here and there and some grays here and there, just to add a little bit more character to the stone. So I did that to the stone. After one sort of sloppy layer of that, I went in for some white. And I didn't really do I used the dry brush, but I had still quite a lot of paint in it. So I would get these sort of strokes going, black brush strokes. So it was on purpose to get sort of a texture into the stone. And I actually used the exact same while I was doing it. I did the same on the wood, because the wood could be highlighted with brown and grey and white as well. So it was pretty much just all over. And then I went to my liquid pigments, which is also a Green Stuff World product. And I'm not saying this now because they sent me nice stuff. I'm saying it because I really think these paints are great. They're basically liquid pigments. I made a video about them as well, which is worth checking out. And on terrain, I think they really shine. I've heard they're great with airbrush. I, for now, just use them with the brush. And there's 3 different sets. There's a rust, a dirt, and an earth, I think. And by now, I actually have all the sets, which, you know, might be unnecessary. I don't know. You can, by now, I think, buy them by the bottle as well. But I used them everywhere. And I went in by color. So, I mean, these roofs, I don't know if it's supposed to be rust or if it's supposed to be brick or whatever it is. But I went with the red sort of rust pigments, and also some of the black. It's called black soot, to sort of just enhance some dirt that's been sort of flowing down and stuff like that. On the wood, I used the earth liquid pigments, sort of highlighting with them. Some of them, just to get sort of some highlights. And on the stones, I used I think they're called industrial dust. There's like 2 grey ones and a white one. And I just painted them on here and there, creating highlights. And because most of the footage by now is really sort of sped up because I'm trying to get this video a bit shorter than, you know. And if you can see that I'm painting, but my hand is flying all over the place as well, that's pretty much because I smudged it up with my finger. I found it a pretty nice way of, like, if you brush on too much, you can just smudge it out a bit with your finger and it just sort of naturally looks great. So that's what the weird thing with but that was pretty much it. The only place where I used regular paint was highlighting the doors, pretty much. Just to get just a bit more highlights going in sort of the green color. And the one I've been showing you, I think it's this. Is it this one? I'm not sure. Yeah, this is the one that's in the video. Now on purpose, I did things a little bit differently on all of them. Like, there's 3 of them here that have the brown roofs. I did one with the green roof, just to make things look a little bit different on the tabletop. I also gave this one over here, instead of green doors, I made brown doors. And, you know, I tried with the liquid pigments as well, just to make sort of some grimy streaks, and I added some of the dirt for the dirt, like added dirt pigments to make it sort of a bit more dirty down the bottom and things like that. Just give them a little bit more character. And all these sort of small details from the Greek rolling pin, they were all, I just painted them green with the only thing that's been happening on there is the green ink and nothing else. And that's my 4 tabletop houses. Now, for building houses, it's not a simple task. And it's not a fast task. I've been trying to make it as efficiently as I could. So not really taking shortcuts, but leaving things out, like not doing windows, not sort of doing any interiors and stuff like that. Trying to paint them, in a manner that doesn't take all that much time, like using the zenithal priming in the ink and stuff like that. Like instead of ink, you could probably use contrast paints, or you could even go and try washes. They won't be as vibrant in colors, but it might work. You could try if that's what you've got. The important thing is using something transparent so that the zenithal priming shines through. And in the end, I'm really happy with these. They're simple. They're all the same size. They look very similar. But I'm thinking like these are my 4 simple tabletop terrain houses. And then maybe I'll do one that's a bit more advanced, say like a pub, or like where the mayor lives, or whatever, something a bit nicer. And then maybe like a water feature, fountain, whatever. And, maybe a few small outhouses and that. And all of a sudden, I've got a little town going, pretty much. And then in amongst everything else, these 4 won't look as similar. You could obviously change things around. Like you could just do the one at a time, or just do all the measurements a bit differently and make 4 completely different houses, or make one story, But this technique of using rolling pins for texture on clay, to get this nicer texture on buildings in the time it took, I think was a win. So then comes the final test, which is to see if these actually fit into the box that they're supposed to go into. Unfortunately, that means telling the cat that his newfound home is no longer his home and he needs to move out unless he wants to live in the basement. But there you go. I was lucky and they fit, and now I just need to fill out the rest of the space of this box with another building. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it's been long and I've been talking about a lot of different things. I really enjoyed making some, I'm supposed to be painting an army. Instead I built these houses, and I should be getting back to the army now. I hope you liked it. If you haven't got any rolling pins, especially for bases, like that's the main thing I think, is like it's a really simple and nice way to get some nice textures on your bases. And if you have some, because you do basing with them, then I reckon you should try this out as well, because it was really fun. So there's going to be more houses. But thanks for watching, and as ever, if you like this channel and want to support, there is a Patreon where you can support. And thanks a lot to everyone that's already a patron, and that's, your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to see sort of more of my everyday, just sort of hobby stuff like that, you can follow me on Instagram. And now it's time to go and paint an army. Thanks for watching. Bye.